A lot of people have been asking to hear from my next guest, returning to the show once again, Jared Beck. Jared, welcome.
Hey, Jason, nice to be with you.
Good to see you again. I think people were very pleased to see our last broadcast. You spoke quite a bit about, what were we talking about last time?
Well, let me think. There's been a lot going on. I think we talked about, I want to say it was about Epstein,
Right.
but I may be wrong about that.
No, we were speaking about Dershowitz, right? The comments that he was
Dershowitz.
making, and now Dershowitz is back in the news. Everybody knows you're a Harvard graduate, you're a lawyer, you're a legal expert. People who are in the Miami area who are looking for trial attorneys should definitely visit beckandlee.com. Additionally, if you're looking for free-range turkeys, Jared's the man. He can help you locate those. But
yeah, we've got a few of those.
Yeah. People, I think, Jared, they really want to hear about some of the finer legal points. It seems like Adam Schiff, who's also a Harvard JD, he just went up there and was running off at the mouth. A lot of what he said struck me as things that might be not allowed in a legitimate court. They're kind of conclusory statements that seem to be made for the television audience. Can you give us a general sense of what you felt watching the impeachment hearings?
Right. So I think the first thing to remember is what you just said, which is this is not a court. It's called a trial. The Chief Justice is sitting there presiding over it. They refer to the senators as the judge and the jury. But at the end of the day, this is not a judicial proceeding under Article 3 of the Constitution, but it is a legislative proceeding that is also provided for under the Constitution, but there are different considerations involved. And because it's more overtly political, I think you can expect a lot more political theater. In fact, the whole thing is political theater.
Right.
As opposed to a bona fide trial where you're going to have a judge who is diligently overseeing the proceedings and making sure that the jurors are only exposed to relevant evidence and testimony and argument of counsel throughout the trial process.
Yeah. I mean, it really seemed to create kind of an open door for the House managers and really basically anybody who was speaking at that thing to just get on there, hammer their talking points and just keep driving home that conclusion that, well, Trump has abused his power, it's criminal, it's impeachable. They kept repeating that. The whole thing to me really had sort of the feeling of a filibuster to it.
Yeah, and what's interesting, though, is at the moment that Rand Paul submitted his question, and it happened to contain the name of the so-called whistleblower who's responsible for, this whole thing from the get-go, that's when Justice Roberts, who was pretty much sitting up there passively, doing God knows what throughout the proceedings, jumped in and wouldn't allow that particular question. So
what do you think about
there
that?
are constraints. I think it's horrible. I think it's horrible. And I say that as somebody who has a case pending in the Supreme Court. And I'm going to be depending on Justice Roberts, along with the other justices, to take a close and fair look at our petition for certiorari when we file it next month. But I was very disappointed to see that. I think this whole song and dance about not being able to say Eric Ciaramarilla's name in the Senate because they're somehow protected that this CIA agent, you don't want to dig too deep there because the public shouldn't have an interest in doing that. I think that's just horrible, but it's also very revelatory, and it reveals, in my mind, the justice giving way to deep state prerogative right in front of our very eyes.
Yeah, and that's just it. I mean, they've tried to convince everybody. Basically, Adam Schiff has been gaslighting the world, trying to convince everybody that this whistleblower has the right to remain anonymous. So you've pointed out that this isn't a trial per se, but this is still the United States. I mean, isn't the president or anybody afforded due process of law and the right to confront their accusers?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, the way this is supposed to work is that the legislators, the members of the Senate, are representatives of the people, and they are passing judgment on the question of whether the elected president of the United States should be removed from office. So this is a question that the public has a great deal of interest in, because you're essentially nullifying the public's vote for president. And it would seem to me that the question of who started these allegations, how these allegations came to be, and what any relationship between those people at the origin and the people pushing the impeachment, including Adam Schiff and his office, I mean, that's relationships would seem to be highly, highly relevant to answering the question, and to shield it from public view, especially given that this guy's name is out already. It's really bizarre. It's really bizarre and disappointing. And to me, it shows that the Chief Justice, along with everybody else in this proceeding, really live in a bubble of epic proportions in Washington, D.C., and are completely disconnected from the rest of the country, and may not have a realistic view of how their actions look to the intelligent public in the U.S.,
It's
of
a
which
very limited
I believe
subset.
there are
Yeah.
some. Well, I believe, I have faith that there are intelligent people out there watching this and horrified at what is going on, not just in the impeachment proceeding, but what happened in Iowa yesterday. And their mouths are agape at just how awful the U.S. government is run, and it seems to be bearing itself right, just shamelessly before us right now.
Yeah, and I mean, you're raising points that are relevant. Really, these have been themes throughout the 2 or 3 years that I've known you, this concept of nullifying the vote and ignoring the law, and sort of the Democrats just doing whatever the hell they want. We're seeing, I mean, somewhat, I don't know if it's a redo or deja vu or what, but, people are going to recall that you and your wife, Elizabeth, spearheaded the DNC lawsuit that was originally brought about because they cheated Bernie Sanders in the primary. Now, along the lines of other countries looking at us and thinking that we're ridiculous, can't even seem to tabulate the results from the election in the Iowa primary last night. What do we know about this?
Well, I think this is a parallel psyop that's going on, being run by the Democrats in connection with their main psyop, which is the impeachment of Donald Trump. I don't believe for a minute that there was some unforeseen malfunction of technology which has prevented the tabulation of the Iowa caucuses up till the present moment, although I think they're supposed to be releasing the results any minute, or supposedly, but I don't believe that for a second. I think this is very, very deliberate on the part of the DNC leadership. And, just like the impeachment proceeding, if we try to read between the lines, we may find clues as to what's really going on behind the scenes. Because as a psyop, this is meant, I believe, to have a significant psychological effect on the American population, in addition to other aims that it's trying to achieve.
But isn't it doing that? I mean, I think that families are arguing. I know I got into a debate with someone at Thanksgiving that just, people are so polarized by this. It seems to be effective in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, polarization, I think that's really the aim of this impeachment proceeding, which everyone knew from the beginning wasn't going to result in a removal of the president. I mean, this was all, pre-scripted, but it's a way for the Democrats to use their media apparatus to blare 24/7 this message of how, horrible Donald Trump is. In any way they can think. I mean, you remarked on the great latitude shown by Schiff in his remarks, and Nadler was going off on how the entire Republican Senate is in a conspiracy to deny the truth. I mean, they're basically using extraordinary heightened rhetoric to just continually pound the message over the airwaves that Donald Trump is a horrible person, and anyone who defends Donald Trump or supports him is a horrible person. And so that's the sort of base level that the PSYOP is operating at, because, like it or not, a lot of people identify with Donald Trump. And we know that because lots of people show up whenever he has a rally. OK, I mean, that's an easy way to know that a lot of people in this country identify with him at a very strong level. So that's the impeachment PSYOP. I think the Iowa PSYOP is a little different, but I think it's going something like this, which is the Democrats are speaking to their own constituents, the people on their own side, specifically the progressive wing that's represented by Bernie Sanders. And they're saying, look, don't even get it in your minds that you can win this thing. We call the shots from the get-go. We're going to cheat early, often, and very, very hard. And we're going to do everything we can to prevent your schmuck from getting the nomination. And this is a way of, beating people down, because if you get people's hopes up, if you give them too much hope, they can get really, really squirrely when you take away what they think they're entitled to. So I think they want to send the message very early on, and I think they're succeeding in doing so, that only a schmuck would continue to believe that Bernie Sanders has a chance to win the nomination. And that's what they're going to whittle the party down to, which is basically schmucks. And that's perfectly fine for the Democratic Party, because the easiest people to control in this world are schmucks. I mean, we all know that, right?
This is all legal technical jargon that you're sharing with the audience, but it's convenient because the results have just come in. The commenters are telling us that Fox is reporting, and it looks like this is sort of a general report here. They're saying Pete Buttigieg won. I mean, that can't possibly be correct.
So
and look
Mr.
at the 33s
CIA,
in the Bernie Sanders
I'm not a
count
spy.
Here.
Yeah, I'm not a spy, but my family's from Malta, and I was in military intelligence, and I just come out of nowhere.
Buttigieg was?
What's that?
Buttigieg
well,
was
in. I mean, he was in something. I mean, he was some officer, wasn't he, in the military?
I know very little about him.
I think if you look into his background, this is as deep state gets with this guy. Okay. And I think this is I don't even think most people in this country even know who this guy is or how to pronounce his name. Okay. And to suggest that, he just swept to victory in Iowa,
seems absurd.
Really, it seems absurd, but I think they're presenting this absurd PSYOP so early and so strongly because they really do want to break the spirit of all the people that are clinging to hope, because it's a war that they're fighting. I mean, they're fighting a war with their own constituents. They can't have them. They want to demoralize those people.
Yeah. Well, and you and your wife, Elizabeth, were on the front lines of that war with your DNC fraud lawsuit, which really they've used the corrupt judicial system that you've described in detail. And we've done many interviews. We've gone and seen Judge Posner, heard about how he was basically drummed out of the, was it the Seventh Circuit?
Yeah, Judge Posner
Yeah.
was the Seventh Circuit, right?
So it's just, more corruption. Has anything happened with the DNC lawsuit? I mean, it seems like we're seeing essentially the same thing happening here. It's almost as if, the lawsuit that you guys launched with Jam Pack and Beck and Lee, it's just exposing what may well have been business as usual, but we, the people, didn't know about it until we created our own news shows, our own law firms, and started really taking these things into our own hands.
Yeah, so we're actually going up to the Supreme Court. We're due to file our what's called a petition for writ of certiorari at the end of March of this year, so not too long from now. And I'm working on the writ as we speak, striving to make it as complete and concise as possible to really do everything that we can to get the Supreme Court to decide this case, because at the end of the day, if the Supreme Court doesn't want to step in and decide the issue of whether the Democratic Party owes a duty to hold real bona fide elections to determine its nominees, then we don't have a democracy in this country, right. And we don't have a pathway out of what we do have, which is an oligarchy that's one half of which is run by the DNC. So I really hope that that I'll be able to put my best foot forward in finishing up this petition and getting it on file with the court, because I see this as sort of, if this legal channel doesn't work, I don't know what else is there in our, collection of tools as citizens. I mean, or lawyers like me. I don't know what else is there to do, quite frankly.
Yeah, I mean, you take it to the Supreme Court, and if they can't do anything about it, I mean, you mentioned earlier how Chief Justice Roberts balked at the mere mention of the CIA whistleblower's name, and people are saying now that. There's rumors, of course, that Chief Justice Roberts is under control of the deep state. There's a lot of questions about Scalia. The WikiLeaks emails spoke about wet works. I mean, it does seem like there are some pretty brazen criminals who don't seem to stop at anything.
Right. What is changing is our ability to see how they exercise their control. I mean, we see it in real time now, Yeah. This Iowa caucus thing being one example. You can actually, if you know what to look for, you can actually see and read these events as they play out. And the key is that you cannot take what the media is telling you at face value. You have to look behind the facts. You have to, if the DNC is saying, well, it was a malfunction in the app, well, you have to go back and look at who designed that app, what company was responsible for it, and then you realize that this is, Hillary Clinton's people are behind this app. Well, that's interesting. Why would the DNC entrust the tabulation of votes to a Hillary Clinton loyalist if it was interested in conducting a fair and even-handed election?
Yeah, and I mean, doesn't it seem like switching the vote, sorry to interrupt, but doesn't it seem like switching the vote from whatever sort of standard, I mean, I feel like even here in New York City, I'm still like filling out like it's an SAT test, this form. Switching it to an app seems like a big deal that we should have heard a lot about, and people are talking about this thing being called the Shadow app. That seems like a weird name for a company that you want to be open and transparent about your elections.
Like CrowdStrike. There's another great name for a company, right? Yeah. Well, I think there's another purpose, I think, to this Iowa psyop that's going on. I think that the DNC actually wants to get rid of the Iowa caucus. And so they, in addition to wanting to send the message that they'll do anything and everything to keep Bernie Sanders and his ilk disenfranchised. They also want to make Iowa a total mess and blame it on the caucus structure itself. Because if you think about it, caucuses are pretty messy to administer. People are sitting in these rooms, they're interacting face to face. There's multiple rounds. It's a lot. I think it's a lot actually harder to control the voting in a caucus than it is in a primary, where people are just, pushing buttons or, sticking a ballot in a box. I think that's much easier actually to subvert. So I think they're probably trying to get rid of the Iowa caucus, if I had to guess. And because there's been a lot of rhetoric about that's accompanying this whole debacle, which is that the Iowa caucus is outmoded, and that may very well be true. I mean, I've never been a big fan of this idea of the Iowa caucus because it just seems very onerous and antiquated. But I think from the perspective of controlling the so-called voters, this is just a reason that you're seeing this particular psyop being done in Iowa now.
Yeah. Well, and it's also telling us that only 62% has reported, so this could still go any way at all. I mean, it's just bizarre to me. Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Joe Biden, longstanding members of the Senate, essentially political brand names. I would think that, you would have thought that at least they would have put Joe Biden first just to at least make people think that was possible. I mean, I wouldn't think that's possible, but this is really a ridiculous result. No one's going to have any confidence in this, particularly after this app failure.
Right. And I think these numbers are numbers that are preordained. I don't think they bear any relation to reality. I think, I mean, the idea that they're only reporting 60% and this is a whole day later. Yeah. How is that possible? How is that possible? Even without an app, I mean, they used to report the results in the evening, right? Without too much trouble. And Iowa's not like a huge state, okay, in terms of population. And this is just a matter of calling each of the precincts and getting what their numbers are. So that's, to me, it's just pretext for them to drip this information into the public consciousness or misinformation, really. I mean, it's fake news. I mean, this is fake news being promulgated by the propaganda mainstream media.
Yeah, I mean, just
and of
switching
course they
back.
won't. Yeah.
Sorry, of course they won't what?
No, I'm just saying, of course, none of these so-called reporters are going to ask any difficult questions about the integrity of the results. I mean, that's not something you'll be able to question in the mainstream. But what we'll probably see happen is a discussion about getting rid of the Iowa caucus, because I don't think the DNC is a big fan of the Iowa caucus. I don't think they want their first primary to be in a state with the demographics of Iowa, and I don't think they like the fact that the voters are so, by the nature of the caucus, the voters are kind of in the face of the administrators for so many hours, because it's just it's just not a good forum for them to be able to fuck around in. So this is why they're doing it. That's my guess.
Yeah. And when we go back to the impeachment for just a minute, it's amazing how, the rules are out the window and they're really just making things up as they go along. I mean, obviously the leaders of the DNC are in league with Adam Schiff and the House Democrats that want to get rid of Trump. So, I'm caused to think about Saul Alinsky as far as just, sowing chaos, confusion, and basically making a mess out of everything. What do you think the Democrats are going to do? They can't possibly be planning to run Pete Buttigieg against Donald Trump.
It seems to me that it's probably going to be Biden at this point, unless he he doesn't last long enough to get to the election season. I mean, these guys are like really, really old, and they don't seem particularly healthy, some of them. So, I mean, it's just amazing that this Biden guy is out there every day. But, back to the impeachment thing. I mean, one thing I wanted to say, part of what they're doing through this impeachment process, they knew from the start they weren't going to be able to get the votes to remove Trump. I mean, that's a given. But I think that the spectacle of having Trump on trial, in this extended, excruciating, extremely boring proceeding, has a real psychological effect on people that identify with Trump. And you have to remember what this case is all about. It's all about the CIA listening in on Trump's conversations with foreign leaders. All right. And I think what they're trying to send the message to the population through Trump, who a big part of the population identifies with, I think they're really trying to send the message that the CIA is all-knowing, the deep state is all-knowing, it listens in. You have no hope. I mean, we've boxed in Trump and we've boxed in you, okay? And that's really kind of the image they want to portray, even if it doesn't result in people agreeing that Trump should be impeached. And I think most people probably either aren't paying attention or probably don't think he should be impeached, because I don't think most people in this country even know where the Ukraine is, quite honestly. And that's what this is about, on its surface. But I think there is this deeper psychological abuse that the DNC is trying to inflict through the impeachment of Donald Trump that's actually targeted at Trump's followers. And I think it's probably working, if I had to guess. I mean, these people are sick. I mean, they're
well, how do you mean it's
diabolical,
working, though?
sick.
Don't you think that this is galvanizing the support for Donald Trump? It seems like everything the Democrats and the CIA do makes them look stupid.
Well, you have to understand who the messaging is geared towards. It's not geared towards the people who are already in Trump's camp. I mean, Trump supporters, I think most of them have been with him from the beginning, and they're not going to listen to anything the Democrats have to say. As far as being galvanized, I don't know what you mean by galvanized. I mean, this is not a country where people really get into the streets and express their displeasure at the government. I mean, that happened in France recently, and, the firefighters were able to save their pension, and they got in the street and they got knocked out by the police. I mean, in this country, people tend, they'll show up to rallies, but that's the extent of it. I think the DNC is really working on, the vast middle of this population, which is sort of unformed in its political opinions. I know it's hard to understand how that can be possible, but I think most people in this country really don't have much of an opinion and aren't very knowledgeable of what's going on. So what comes out of that TV is what enters into their brain waves and shapes their view, however rudimentary it may be. And so I think it is having an effect in the sense that it's transmitting the message that, we've got Trump surrounded on all sides. We've got you surrounded on all sides. So don't even think about putting up a resistance. And in that way, it's really trying to give people a sense of extraordinary alienation and hopelessness vis-a-vis the machinations of their own government.
Well, I hope that's not working. I certainly feel like the Democrats are idiots, and I'm not swayed from voting for Donald Trump. People are going to recall, Jared, that you are the author of the book, What Happened to Bernie Sanders. It's always interesting to see what Amazon does to the price of some of these books. People can get it for $3.56. I'm sure that's not the price.
And you can save so much money, or give this to a relative with a message like, read this book, and you'll understand why giving money to a Democrat is a complete waste of your resources.
Yeah.
I mean, you can save people so much for like $3.56. I mean, this is the gift that will save your friends and family relatives, your friends and family a lot of money if you give it to them, even if you or maybe perfectly convinced that the Democrats are in the business of rigging elections. That's remarkably, the word still hasn't really gotten out about that.
Right. I mean, how does
In the
Bernie
country.
Sanders not realize what's happened to him? It seems to be
Oh, he
happening
knows.
again.
At this point, he's obviously colluding in the whole thing. I mean, I think there were questions to be raised about how active he was in the collusion in 2016. But I think at this point, and he's not an idiot. He knows exactly what he's doing. I think he's a despicable person for cashing in on the hopes and dreams of the least fortunate in this country. And I think it's absolutely appalling that somebody would continue to raise money under these circumstances and not even lift a finger in the DNC's direction. And I think he'll go down in history as an extraordinary coward. Just like all collaborators are. Okay, collaborators are the ones that always get the worst treatment by history. It's not necessarily the source of the evil or the evil dictator who gets remembered with the most bitterness, but it's the collaborators, those that feathered their own nests at the expense of people who were suffering. And that's exactly what Bernie Sanders is doing right now. I have no love for the man, as you can see.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you've been through the ringer. You went to bat for the guy, and I mean, he's not what we thought he was in 2015 and 2016. Project Veritas has been doing a series where they're finding these, radical Bernie Sanders staffers who are, they're talking about how they want to beat up and imprison Trump supporters. Have you heard about this?
No, that's the first time I'm seeing this. But there's a lot of crazy people in the Bernie Sanders camp. I've been the target of an extraordinary amount of abuse. When I was on when I was on Twitter before I got banned, I would have these people. One guy named Jeff Campbell in Miami who would continually harass me and Elizabeth and accuse us of being grifters. Well, we're grifters. We paid for the entire and continue to pay for the entire DNC fraud lawsuit out of our own pockets. That's money that I could be spending on my kids' college education. And this freaking jackass, Jeffrey Campbell, calls me and my wife like grifters. I think these people are crazy. I think they're vile, disgusting human beings. And yeah, a lot of them are affiliated with the Bernie Sanders camp. And it doesn't surprise me. And I think the DNC, including Bernie Sanders and all his acolytes, are absolutely, positively rotten to the core.
Wow, well said. And also, we want to remind people that the Jared Beck AI bot that is currently active on Twitter is not Jared, is not controlled by Jared. It is a funny, meme type bot, and it is promoting the book, which is good. But this has nothing to do with Jared. It does not express
nothing to do
Jared's
with me.
views.
I'm very grateful for whoever or whatever is behind this account. It appeared in early of last year. And I would read it from time to time, and I think it was pretty funny. So I kept an eye on it, and then after I got banned, the account it'll occasionally post things that I post in other places, such as Gab. And by the way, I'd really recommend people that rely on Twitter and Facebook to consider really getting and cultivating another social media account if social media activity is something that's important to you. I mean, Zero Hedge was just banned from Twitter the other day. I mean, that should be the signs are pretty obvious at this point that Twitter is a highly, highly regulated and restricted. I hesitate to call it a forum. I think echo chamber is the right word, and I think it's going to, frankly, go out of relevance at some point soon. I mean, you can't. Nobody can just continually exclude people from the conversation simply because they find their opinions disagreeable, without ultimately making their own conversation extraordinarily boring. I mean, this is a rule of thumb that you see in discourse again and again. And who the heck wants to be part of an extraordinarily boring conversation? I mean, it's just not going to draw people in anymore at a certain point, and it'll just be a collection of the most brainwashed, propaganda spitting denizens at some point. So it's really the time to get comfortable in some other alternate forum, just to have a place, even if you don't use social media, just to have a place to put up something once in a while if something happens to you, because you can be very well. The day is coming when anybody who even smacks of a free-thinking opinion vis-a-vis the deep state and all of its manifestations is going to be banned from certainly Twitter and possibly Facebook, depending on what direction Facebook goes in.
Yeah, I mean, for many years, it was unclear to me how Twitter could possibly make any money. I wasn't seeing any ads on there. You don't have to pay to join it. I mean, none of it made any sense. But now that we see the influence that they've exerted through the 2016 election and now the 2020 election, it becomes a lot more clear exactly what it is they may have had in mind in the creation of that thing and, giving it out to people for free. The problem is, they've essentially... I've said this many times, they're using the heroin dealer business model where they give you this product for free until you're basically hooked on it. And now people who want to start competitive alternatives like Gab have such a huge uphill battle. I mean, I think I've been on Gab for 2 or 3 years. I've got 811 followers, and I'm trying to post whenever we put out a video. So it's just, it's a little bit of a kind of a downward spiral in that there's not that much of a conversation going on there for people to get involved in.
Right. Well, that's the problem, is that you attract people, to the critical mass of in the mainstream social media. That's all. I mean, all of that was planned and financed originally by the military, and then they broke it out into the consumer sphere when they felt they had a prototype that was ready. But the thing I like about Gab is that the developers of Gab, I think, have been fighting a very difficult struggle to find a platform that's resistant to being, interrupted and taken down by various vendors.
Yeah.
Which was, one of the things that was really crippling to it in its first couple of years. Now it's attached to this thing called the Fediverse, which is a sort of an open source social media platform that makes it very, very difficult to actually bring it down because it's decentralized. It's almost like a Bitcoin-like model or infrastructure. So it's very resistant to being censored by its third parties. So that's the reason I use it. But I agree that the traffic there is minuscule compared to what you have on Twitter and Facebook. And for that reason, there's a real cost for people to abandon their familiar platforms and get on an alternative platform. But honestly, you're going to have to incur some costs if you want to escape the deep state's ever increasing reach.
Yeah, and they've got sort of covert ways of doing that, of infiltrating social media platforms, and they're not going to use the heaviest hand necessarily to sort of shun something. Osmo Oppenheimer is telling us that Gab was shut down in New Zealand following the Christchurch shooting. You and your family actually went to Christchurch. You want to share any aspects of what you saw there when you went to New Zealand?
It was eye-opening there. I think in Christchurch was the city is definitely tense. You have to realize that mass shootings are not something that people have a lot of experience with or are familiar with. So you can definitely sense that in talking to people. We actually, as a family, we visited actually both mosques where the shootings occurred, and that's something that a lot of people don't know about, is that the there were actually two mosques. There was one big central mosque in Christchurch, which is sort of the one that you see in the media reports, the mainstream media reports. But then there was a second shooting that occurred by the same shooter at a much smaller mosque across town. And it was what was weird. I mean, there were a couple weird things that I noticed on our trip to New Zealand. The first is that there was this very strong police presence at the first mosque, including what looked to be a mobile operations van parked right in the parking lot. So we really, we didn't even actually go in, to see anything. And our purpose for going there, by the way, was to lay, flowers and pay our respects, and because I thought it was important to bring our kids there. But the drive to the second mosque was actually a very long drive. I mean, it was at least 20, 25 minutes, in the middle of the day. And it just seemed very unlikely that the shooter would be able to go from one and then to the other
without getting apprehended.
Yeah, but, I mean,
aren't there so many things about it, Jared, that seem unlikely? Like we observed in the video, no bullet holes where people were being shot with their backs right up against the wall. A guy whose hat went flying off of his head, but no damage to his cranium at all. The whole thing seemed quite bizarre.
Yeah, we weren't able to get into the first mosque where that video was taken, but that's certainly that video imagery seemed odd, and also the fact that you can get they'll put you in jail in New Zealand for even possessing that video on a device. So, I mean, that you want to talk about censorship. I mean, this is really, I think in some ways New Zealand is a playground for our own deep state to sort of try out various levels of social control, social engineering before it's brought here. And I say that because there's historically always been a very, very tight relationship between the CIA and what are called the Five Eyes, which includes New Zealand and their Secret Service. So, something like that could very well be on the horizon for us. It wouldn't surprise me.
It does seem like a crucible or a beta test or something over there. The gun grab and all the things that went on. I'm trying to find the article now, but I'm not seeing it right away. We had John Podesta in New Zealand,
right,
just like a day before that happened.
Yeah, I don't know if it was a day or a week or something, but he was definitely there. It's sad because New Zealanders, I think they're, I think you go to the U.S. now and you sense sort of a pervasive distrust in the population of their government. I don't think you have the same thing in New Zealand. I think people are generally much more trusting of what their government tells them. Even today. And so I think, doing something like a gun grab is much easier carried out there. There's just no resistance whatsoever, baked into the political system there.
And a sad reflection of where we're at in 2020, we've got a conscientious viewer in the chat here reminding you to be careful with the keywords that trigger YouTube algorithms. And the chat, basically Mrs. C telling us that just talking about this stuff could damage my standing here on YouTube, something that, has been going on. There's an active campaign. I don't know if I spoke to you about this, Jared, but on December 26th, a cadre of social engineers who have been after me for almost 3 years put out a live stream in which they announced #GayOpsEscalation against me. And that's got nothing to do with homosexuality. Gay ops describes the activity of creating a conspiracy to defame, harass, and deplatform somebody on social media, something that's been ongoing. I got a threatening text message from somebody who initially presented themselves to me as a friend basically reiterating that same sentiment that in some certain period of time, crowdsource the truth will cease to exist. I do want to encourage people to join us on Subscribestar and Patreon, which can help mitigate that circumstance. But just quickly back to New Zealand, because we're talking about it. I don't know if you've seen this image of the alleged shooter's gun. It's got this sort of diamond, like fishtail type symbol on it that seems oddly similar to this weird symbol on Podesta's hand, the 14 fish. Like, what the hell is going on with this guy, and how has he not been indicted for something yet?
Well, he's not. No, he's been appointed to the DNC Rules Committee, so he'll be. No, he's one of the guys on the Rules Committee. I mean, they're elevating him. I mean, this is a deep state soldier right here, a proud colonel in the PSYOP wing of the
Hall of Fame,
the blue deep state. Yeah, I mean, this is doing his job as he sees fit. And it's unfortunate. I mean, I think there are still people holding on for prosecutions of the bad guys, but I don't see it. I've been told, how many times were we told that there were thousands and thousands of sealed indictments just waiting to be unsealed, right? These people, they're laughing at us. They're mocking us. That doesn't mean they're going to stay in power forever, but I think we're still at a very, very early stage of consciousness building, and it might not even be in our generation that actual justice is realized.
Did you ever, in your legal career, I know a lot of times when people are starting out, they'll clerk for a judge or be involved maybe in a district attorney office or something like that. Have you ever been involved in any kind of law enforcement stuff? What the hell is taking William Barr so long to do anything?
No, I think he's part of the whole apparatus. I mean, his father was the principal of the school when it hired Epstein to teach there, the Dalton School. Yeah. He's goes back to the Bush administration. He's intimately familiar with how to stonewall investigations and let only the bare minimum of information leak out. At the end of the day, I really do think Trump is surrounded on all sides, including his own cabinet. I don't think he has, and I don't think any president would have an ability to enjoy true freedom of movement in the office. And they're largely there for distraction purposes, so that the true government, the deep state government, can operate in the background. And it's unfortunate, but I think the picture, at least for me, it's becoming clearer every day.
I agree with you on that. There's just so many. I mean, I guess what I'm getting at with that question is, given the evidence of FISA abuse, there's been all this, reports about it and talk. How long would it take to put together an indictment? I mean, why isn't, we got Adam Schiff coming out and in the trial, we heard Donald Trump's lawyers say that, Schiff didn't have the authority to issue these subpoenas. The House has the authority, and they need to vote to bestow it to Schiff's committee. He just comes out and says, well, that's been debunked, and they move on. It doesn't seem like they're ever able to use any legal force to stop this.
Right. I think rule of law has been thoroughly compromised in certain areas of this country, not in all areas. I think our normal civil litigation is still going on in a rule of law fashion for the most part. But when it comes to any issue that would put a component of the deep state on trial or draw the public's attention to what's going on behind the curtain, I think that the legal system, as it's developed, is more a protector of the deep state's interest than anything else. And again, I bring you back to Chief Justice Roberts at the Senate. I mean, if the Chief Justice and Rand Paul cannot even be allowed to utter the name of a certain CIA agent in a impeachment proceeding, then what hope do the rest of us have for taking on this beast, unless something massive changes in the distribution of power in this country?
Yeah. Well, it's absolutely ridiculous. You're right. I do want to talk about Alan Dershowitz, but you've mentioned civil litigation, so it brings me back to a subject that you and I have discussed in the past. The Fresno Bee just last week ran an article focusing now not so much on Devin Nunes and the lawsuits, but his lawyer who's been questioned over ethics complaints. I want to be careful what we talk about because he's a very litigious guy, and people are going to know that he's representing Robert David Steele in the lawsuit against me. There have been some important changes in that lawsuit recently. Again, I don't want to go into them yet because it's still pending, but this is not a very flattering article in the Fresno Bee about Devin Nunes or his lawyer, Stephen Biss. He wrote this letter to Ted Lieu threatening other members of Congress. I got no love for Ted Lieu, but some of this stuff is quite egregious. Have you been following this at all?
I haven't seen this article. When did it come out?
This came out maybe the 31st of January. It's worth reading.
Oh, well.
People can check out the Fresno Bee. It goes into some details about the motion to disqualify Mr. Biss as Robert David Steele's attorney, a motion that I entered a while ago and is having some impact on the lawsuit. So I'm encouraged by your statements that civil litigation is still going on. Very hard to tell how this partnership of Stephen Biss and Devin Nunes came about. It's talking about me being sued, etc., and it's talking about some of the stuff that went on in our lawsuit, but people can check that out. I mean, there's been a proposal in Virginia now to introduce an anti-SLAPP statute to prevent these strategic lawsuits against public participation. And that legislation actually references Mr. Nunes's suits. So hopefully there are some changes happening, Jared. I mean, people are not going to sit still forever, right?
Right. And the good thing about our judicial system, as opposed to the other branches of government, is that the system is actually dispersed among many, many individuals in many different places. And in my experience as a lawyer in this country, practicing for the last 15 years, most judges just want to do their job and decide the case in front of them correctly. And so that's good. That's a good starting point for, restoring rule of law in this country. But what has to happen is that the people at the top really need to undergo that change in consciousness, or some of them really, they really need to just take a step back and look at the crisis state of our democracy and do what they can. And I'm afraid that the people that are cloistered in DC are just living in way too much of a bubble. That's my fear.
Yeah, and they also seem to be very comfortable with this concept of no repercussions for their actions. There's a lot happening even right now while we're live here, Jared. True Pundit has posted a story only 8 minutes ago that apparently creepy Mayor Pete, his campaign paid the firm that developed this voting app. I mean, this is just naked. It's just like, you don't have to be that sophisticated to know that that can't possibly be the right way to do this.
Yeah, which is why I go back to the point that I really do believe this is an intentional psyop undertaken by the DNC and its leadership to, number one, crush the spirit of anyone who is resistant to the rule that the DNC has operated for a long time now. And number two, I really do think they want to destroy the Iowa caucus and replace it with something else, or have Iowa bumped out of, because I just think demographically and procedurally, caucuses are antithetical to, in Iowa, are antithetical to the rule of the Democratic Party at the present moment.
Yeah. So in the last couple of minutes we have, Jared, I want to take you back to the impeachment and speak about Professor Dershowitz and what he said. A lot of people dislike Alan Dershowitz for his association with Jeffrey Epstein. He defended O.J. Simpson. He defended Klaus von Bülow. Saw an interview with Chris Wallace in which Professor Dershowitz spoke about his specific desire to get involved in cases that nobody else wants to get involved in. I mean, certainly when you become a criminal defense attorney, you're going to be dealing with a lot of criminals, and to be specialized in constitutional law in the way that he is, we cannot have a system that treats everyone fairly if we all collectively decide that an unsavory person doesn't deserve a fair defense, because then all we need to do is assemble the media apparatus, as appears to be happening in the case of Donald Trump, to make somebody appear unsavory, and then they automatically get no due process and an unfair trial. What can you say about Professor Dershowitz and what he said there at the Senate?
Yeah, well, my thought on Dershowitz is, if you're going to listen to anything at the impeachment hearing, go back and listen to Dershowitz's presentation, because he's really the only, him, I guess Kenneth Starr as well, but Dershowitz is the real courtroom lawyer there. Yeah, but Dershowitz is a real courtroom lawyer, and Adam Schiff is like a professional pole. Okay, he's a hack. I mean, he's not a master of the legal craft in the way that Dershowitz is. So if you're actually going to go through the trouble of watching any of this, actually watch somebody who has a real talent for courtroom presentation, capturing the imaginations of the people that are sitting in front of them and really trying to sway them, because that's what Dershowitz is practiced at. And, I think he's a lot more interesting to listen to than, people like, this monotone, or just, I don't even know how, cringeworthy delivery of people like Adam Schiff. I don't know how people can stand to listen to that guy. Or look at the guy. There's clearly something wrong with him at a very, very fundamental level. And, I'm not saying Dershowitz is an angel, but at the same time, I wonder. We had this discussion previously about the conflict between him and David Boies,
right?
And I think the accusations against him deserve a lot of scrutiny, just because of the fact that they emanated from the Boies law firm, and I know that issue is being litigated in his defamation case, because when you look at Boies and you look at his firm, what you have is really the ultimate legal hatchet men for the Democratic Party.
Yeah, that was an interesting thing. I think a lot of people who are outside the legal community weren't necessarily familiar with David Boies when this all came down. And, there's a real sense of people sort of deciding who they like. When it comes to candidates, we're talking about identity politics, but people just sort of felt like, Dershowitz is hanging out with Epstein. Epstein is a bum, so we don't like Dershowitz. But, David Boies is hanging out with a different flavor of the same turd.
Absolutely.
So, not really much better. Well, Jared, we're almost out of time. Is there anything else that you wanted to discuss before we wrap up this session?
No, I think we covered a lot of ground there.
Yeah. It's always good having you on, and I think people like hearing the legal perspective that you bring. One more thing I wanted to ask you about with regard to Harvard Law. Dershowitz mentioned early in his presentation at the Senate Lawrence Tribe, and he
Right.
said that Lawrence Tribe is his good friend. I did not know this until very recently, but Dr. Corsi shared with me that Lawrence Tribe is the ideological father of this practice of lawfare. Have you ever dealt personally with Lawrence Tribe? Do you know him? Any
Yeah,
classes at Harvard?
yeah, I took his constitutional law class. I found him to be a very good teacher, very inspiring in his command of the material. I'm very disappointed in how he's become sort of a Trump deranged a sufferer of Trump derangement syndrome and really blind in his political allegiances. I sense a real mismatch between the public positions that he takes and how he presents himself in the classroom as a scholar. But I don't know what to make of that. I mean, sometimes people just surprise you in good ways, and sometimes they surprise you in bad ways. But I have nothing bad to say about him as a teacher. I will say that when he was at Harvard, one thing that did bother me was that, well, I know he's still at Harvard. I don't know if he does this anymore, but he used to employ students as research assistants, and they would work on these cases that he had, and he would bill them out at like a ridiculous
What?
amount of money, which I think is pretty unethical.
Unethical.
I don't,
Yes.
I mean, here, and I say that as a practicing attorney. I mean, to use your law students as a pool of labor on cases which make you an extraordinary amount of money, and some of these were mass tort cases where he he was getting either a handsome fee for arguing the appeal, on an hourly basis, or maybe even a contingency fee basis. And I know those research assistants were making like $10 an hour for preparing the briefs. I mean, that's not. I don't think that's cool. I mean,
No.
I approve of law professors that actually litigate. Of which Lawrence Tribe is one, because they actually have something substantive to teach their students, unlike most law professors who have absolutely no idea what the inside of a courtroom looks like. But on the other hand, I don't think they should be allowed to have this extraordinary competitive advantage and use talented law students at bottom basement rates so that they can line their own pockets. So that's my
Yeah,
one complaint about it.
well, that's definitely despicable. Did he speak at all in your experience about this concept of lawfare, the practice of lawfare?
No, our class focused mostly on cases of constitutional law. It wasn't really about the litigation process per se. I don't know if I would consider him the originator of lawfare. I think we've always lived in a very, very litigious society. He may be one of the more recent architects in the constitutional realm, but there are firms out there that that really do specialize in lawfare, and they've been perfecting that for a while.
Yeah. I mean, this is what Dr. Corsi said,
Yeah,
unprompted by me. And of course, you're familiar with the Lawfare blog, Ben Whitty's,
right.
their contributors,
Is that
Shane
is that
Harris.
associated with Tribe, the lawfare
Absolutely. He's a
blog?
contributor to this.
Okay. Oh, so okay, all right. I didn't know
And
that. I
this,
didn't
in
realize
many
that was
ways,
his.
this thing was the petri dish in which this vile, impeachment scam has been, festered and brewed, and
I
they
see.
have brought this about. But yeah, Lawrence Tribe is a regular contributor to
Yeah,
Lawfare. Ben Whitty's
I got you.
psyop and total gaslighting piece of garbage over here. But Jared, I really appreciate your time. I know everybody always loves seeing you on the show. We wish you well. When is this appeal with the Supreme Court for the DNC lawsuit happening?
March 26th. March 26th. Our petition for writ of certiorari is due. We got an extension from Justice Thomas, so we're very grateful for that, and it gives us ample time to really put together the best product that we can, so we can hopefully get the Supreme Court to look at this case and impose some accountability on our political parties, because if there's no accountability, what is there?
Yeah. And is there anything that viewers can do to support that effort, either financially or writing letters to somebody or something like that?
I mean, financially, we've never taken any donations, and we're not going to take any donations for this case. It's all self-funded by the attorneys. But in terms of support, I mean, the best thing you can do is just get the word out about it. Go to our website, jampack.us. There's a whole wealth of court documents that are available there for you to peruse. You'll see transcripts from the hearings in the lower court that will contain revelations about our political process that you may not have even considered. And the great thing about this case is that we've already, even though we were dismissed in the lower court, we got the DNC to admit many things on the record, including that they believe they have the right to pick the candidates the way they see fit and ignore the will of the people. And right now, whenever I log into the social media or I see what's going on in the Twitter world, I see that transcript is getting cited again and again and again. So it's, building a record is a very, very important thing, because it provides an anchor on which people can build arguments and piece together the legal and political reality that they live in. So I think the case has already done a lot, and we hope that it does more to rectify the political situation in this country.
You raise an excellent point that I hadn't thought of, because without you planting that legal flag in the ground, I mean, we basically can look at what's happening literally right now. It becomes a pattern in practice, right? This is not some, offshoot or some, odd occurrence. This is just the way that it happens, and now we've kind of got our eyes on them. So thank you for doing that, Jared. I'll remind people that they can still purchase the book, What Happened to Bernie Sanders. You can get that anywhere books are sold. You can buy it from Simon & Schuster or Barnes & Noble. And Jared, I always appreciate having you on the show. Say hello to Elizabeth and the family farm there that you guys have. I want to thank everybody for watching us. We'll be back tonight at 8 p.m. with Mike Moore of True Pundit for another episode of More Pain. So join us on Subscribestar and Patreon if you're not already a sponsor. It's so important that you become a sponsor. If you're watching these free shows every day on YouTube, if you want them to continue, you got to become a sponsor. I hope that people will join us, and we'll see everybody later tonight. Thanks for watching.